we are like now a full week or more than a week into like Fuentes gate or Groyper gate, this like idiotic scandal where everyone on our side is not just taking the bait, but just eating the bait so passionately and not even realizing that they've been hooked.
But here we are talking about it.
And here we are talking about we're taking the bait. We're taking the bait. We're maintaining strategic distance and an emotional coldness with this bait. We're looking at the bait. We're analyzing the bait. We are kind of deconstructing the bait, but we're not taking the bait. But for those of the people who are blessedly ignorant about what's happening, give us the basic rundown of this scandal in kind of the least inside baseball manner that you can.
I mean, it's kind of even hard to describe because, we were talking about like, we're in an age, we're in a period of like just pure psychodrama. So these are, streamer wars, pundit wars. I think there might be something like maybe significant sort of at the core of this. And we'll try to drill down and like figure out what is actually animating a lot of this. But the kind of burn off we're seeing is just, psychodrama mostly. Okay, the short of it is there's a streamer, Nick Fuentes, young guy. He is sort of nominally on the right. However, he like sort of opposed Donald Trump and wanted to get his supporters to vote for Kamala. And, he wanted to make Kanye president. And he's been critical of J.D. Vance, critical of the Israel lobby in particular. And, he talks about the JQ, the Jewish question, et cetera. And this has provoked a lot of consternation and sort of like emotional reaction from the conservative commentariat. So there's this guy and he's got this stream and he's got these followers called Groypers. And then Tucker Carlson, everybody knows Tucker Carlson, a man who needs no introduction, had Fuentes on his show. Okay, so Tucker Carlson has this big platform. He has Fuentes on this show. And now there's been this like weeks long back and forth debate about the, prudence of having Nick Fuentes on your show and whether this constitutes some kind of like betrayal of the movement. And does Tucker Carlson now have a seat at the table? What seat? Nobody really knows. Nobody will specify what any of this stuff means. It all just sort of lives in this abstract space, the kind of vague sort of emotional discourse that gets passed around on Twitter. And nonetheless, this has now created real world consequences. So the Heritage Foundation has been embroiled in this scandal. Kevin Roberts put out a video sort of explaining, maybe not in the most artful way, his position on this, which caused more backlash. And now people are threatening to, maybe take funds from the Heritage Foundation. And then, the turn here is that the New York Times and sort of the liberal establishment has caught wind of this phenomenon and this wedge that now exists within the right to try to sort of further inflame these differences, not just of opinions, but sort of different ideological strains that Trump is holding together as a part of this coalition. And I do think there are real differences here and real sort of potential for this thing to fracture. So again, I don't want to be so dismissive as to say none of this matters. But what we've seen is the New York Times, people who don't like Trump, who've never liked Trump, who want to see the MAGA coalition fail, who want to see the return to a kind of centrist, sort of liberal conservatism. They want to use this as a wedge to break apart the MAGA coalition. And here we are trying to make some sense of this. Did I miss anything?
Yeah, I think the one thing that you missed is that like all great, highly intellectual debates in the United States, it really boils down to Hitler. And so like we have like,
okay, true.
We've gone now, full Hitler in this debate. Like Hitler is like the great kind of central symbol of our times, and everything is reduced to this kind of surface level kind of morality where everyone accuses everyone else of being a Nazi. And Fuentes's appeal and Fuentes's rise to fame comes along with his oftentimes explicit endorsement of Hitler, of Nazism. And let's roll a clip to show people exactly what this looks like and then analyze it.
Hitler was a pedophile and kind of a pagan. It's like, well, he was also really cool. So, time to grow up. We're not children anymore. Am I right? Am I right? Am I right, boys? Am I right? Let's go. He was also really cool. And any boy knows that. Anybody that watches these videos where he's rolling down the street and stuff, it's like, this guy's awesome. This guy's cool.
And so here's how I think about it, and here's how I try to maintain that kind of cold, calculating, strategic analysis of this phenomenon. What I don't want to do is take the bait and react emotionally. And what I think a better frame of reference is to look at it as far as actions, outcomes, interests. And so you can see why the left is interested in this clip. Or this kind of general phenomenon, because the left has been trying to turn, the conservatives into Nazis and Trump into Hitler for 10 years now. That's been like the dominant rhetorical arc that they've been trying to build. They failed to do it in Trump's first term. They've failed to do it in this recent reelection campaign. And just as that kind of great liberal hope of establishing the narrative has fizzled out, they get someone who's willing to kind of break the taboo and openly say, look at Hitler. Hitler is great. Hitler is so cool. And so the establishment left press, the New York Times, finally got their Nazi. And of course, this is in Fuentes' interest because these clips become highly viral, right? They're scandalous, they're salacious, they're shocking, they're kind of digestible as sound bites. They circulate through television, through podcasts, through other digital platforms. But what the right has done now is also buy into this. You have Ted Cruz saying, look at this complete Nazi. You have conservative think tank staffers saying Nazis are bad, and look, on one level, that's obviously true, right? Historical Nazism was awful. It was monstrous. It was a disaster. But they're falling for, what postmodern theorists called hyperreality. There's reality, the world as it is, social connections, material connections, kind of really meaningful things in the world. Then there's hyperreality. These are simulations or digital representations or zeros and ones that simulate some past reality, but they don't actually have the embodied force or kind of real social or historical weight of those past events. And so I like to say that, Nick Fuentes is not a Nazi, because the Nazis, Germany was denazified in the 1940s, and besides pockets of, skinheads or neo-Nazis in Europe and elsewhere, Nazism is a long dead ideology. And instead, he's using the symbols of Nazism to drive controversy and then to increase his kind of attention and notoriety, to play the villain in the left, to play the spoiler on the right. And if you take that framework, you say, this is like Nazism in the hyper-real sense only. We're not going to react emotionally or hysterically to it. And then you analyze the actual outcomes, say, well, he tried to spoil Trump. It didn't work. There aren't actually Groyper voters out there. It's a digital phenomenon. And then if you look at, what he's doing on the right pragmatically, he's signaling against Trump, signaling against Vance, splitting the conservative coalition. You can kind of generate your opinion about it, just setting like the moral hysteria aside, setting the kind of moral questions aside altogether for now. They're important, but I think they're easily kind of manipulated. You simply have to say, when Fuentes' notoriety rises, the right's power, coherence, and political fortune declines, and so adjust accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, you spelled this out in this essay you just wrote for City Journal, which I had a chance to read, and I think the thesis is basically right. I mean, I'm not going to quibble like too much on the margins. I think, just even like showing that clip or like talking about Hitler, like using that language is already losing the fight. It's already like capitulating that this is like commentary worth engaging in. I think most young people see that clip of him and they just laugh. That's it. It's just this kind of like mild amusement. And okay, fine. That's totally fine. Like that's like okay. I want to like, all right, because we talk about what are the policy implications of any of this? Like, how does this cash out into politics? What are the consequences, as you say? Even on like, if you take this core position, and I don't want to dismiss that there's nothing going on. It's not just sort of randomized sort of politics. There is a core to this, and it's a mistake to avoid what the core issue is. And of course, it revolves around Israel. It revolves around this kind of like relationship with Israel that the United States has vis-a-vis foreign policy, vis-a-vis a kind of moral commitment and diplomatic commitment to this country. This quote unquote special relationship. What is the basis of that special relationship? Can we actually talk about it? And when you actually, what's interesting, like when you listen to Fuentes, for example, I saw this clip going around where he was talking about how actually he sort of supports the U.S. giving money to Israel. So even on like the central question, should we be funding Israel? He sort of came around to this position that yes, we should, because that's the only way to control Israel. And this was based on some tablet article that Jacob Siegel had written. And there are like Israel boosters who want a withdrawal of sort of explicit diplomatic and materiel support so that Israel has more freedom to do what they want with their neighbors. And so Fuentes was like, well, maybe we actually do want to sort of like maintain some control, which demonstrates a sort of like nimble thinking and gets to the heart of this, which is actually it's sort of complicated. But the operating question is, we need to ask first, what is in America's interest here? And like when we're talking about Israel, it needs to be treated. There is no, in response to this whole like episode, I saw this yesterday. Some task force that the Heritage put together this statement, sort of making this, in my view, this very sort of like histrionic demand of what the Heritage Foundation needs to do in response to this controversy. And embedded in that demand is this sentence to preserve the role of Israel, and its special biblical and political arrangement with the United States. And I think that's wrong, okay? Like, I do think that's a mistake to think that Israel has some special role. Israel ought to be treated like any other country. It ought to be treated like Paraguay or like Slovenia or Singapore, which is to say that our interests come first. When we are evaluating how we want to interact with Israel, that is the only thing that matters. And so what this, and we can like have that debate. Maybe it does make sense, for example, to give them money. Maybe it doesn't. I think this administration is sort of like walking a fine line and has done a pretty good job. And I certainly think like the Israel lobby, maybe they got 80% of what they wanted out of this. That's good enough, and they should be happy with that. But I think we need to actually address like what it is that is at the core of this, and what Fuentes's followers, the people who listen to these clips, they see a old foreign policy establishment that seems to have a special interest with Israel. They see things like these anti-Semitic hate laws, these special carve-outs. They've been told for a long time that Israel is our greatest ally. This has kind of just been a default view, and they want that to be addressed. And I think we would be mistaken to just dismiss this whole thing purely as spectacle without sort of taking some of those concerns seriously.